now they are going to find out who the betrayer is tonight, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Okay, let's go to Brian down in Rocket City, Alabama. Why is Rachel spelled as Rahel in Jeremiah 31:15 in the King James Bible? Thus saith the Lord God, a voice was heard in Ramah, lamentation and bitter weeping, Rahel weeping for her children. Now, let's take the Hebrew word Rahel here, and let's pull that up in the Bible. Now, as you see, many times, most of the time, it is Rachel. In fact, it looks like, I went through those 47 very quickly, but it looks like only one time is it Rahel. Yeah, so let me say that we're definitely talking about Rachel, Leah's sister, and Jacob's wife. That is the woman that is talked about here. So these other times in the book of Genesis that you see Rachel, you've got it. Now, incidentally, you've got, what is it? Where is, sorry, I was getting confused. I confused myself. I was thinking of Rahab for a moment, because I was thinking, where is she in Joshua? But that's Rahab. Rahel threw me off to Rahab. There's some interesting things about Rahab and Rahab's name as well. Now, first of all, what we've got in Jeremiah 31:15 is the same as in Genesis. It's the same woman. Why didn't they spell it the same way? It is, first of all, both of them are trying to take a name from one language and get it into another language, which is inherently, of course, difficult. One of the reasons it's difficult is because certain letters, sounds, don't always come into another language. I have been a couple of places where the language didn't have a very good R sound. So Randy became very difficult. And it always came out, to the locals as Wandy. There's Wandy. Because they don't do that R sound enough to be able to bring it up. So we got Wandy and Wussel, and who else is in an R here? We'll see. So there's an inherent difficulty. In Hebrew, that CH sound, we say rach, we have that ch. They don't have a ch sound, as in Rachel. For whatever reason, when they came to Jeremiah, they spelled it, they transliterated it, basically. They spelled it in a way that goes with the Hebrew pronunciation. And the Hebrew, if you go to Israel today, it would be pronounced Rahel. A little bit of right there, Rahel. Probably Jeremiah 31:15 is closer. Rahel, that's more of the place. When I go to Jerusalem, often I stay, let me see if I can pull it up. Yeah. I stay in, let me back up just one there. I stay in a little kibbutz that's got a very nice hotel. That is called, there's the hotel there, and it is called, as you see up in the upper right-hand corner, you notice it says Ramat Rachel Resort, if you're in English. But they pronounce it Ramat Rahel. Ramat Rahel. Now, Ramat, does that ring a bell with, here, Ramat, right there, Ramat Rahel. Let's go over here. A voice was heard in Ramah. Ramah is a noun. Ramat is just an adjective. In the heights of Rachel, Ramat Rahel. So in Ramah, which is a high place, lamentation and bitter weeping, Rahel weeping for her children. Now, okay, that was a long way around, and I still haven't answered your question of why did the King James, because the King James translated it everywhere else. Why here? You notice this some with some other names, Isaias and Isaiah, Timotheus and Timothy. I think that our friend Brian Ross probably does the best job at describing this in his book, the King James Bible in America, which, of course, is available at dispensationalpublishing.com. The King James Bible in America, a historical, orthographic, and textual history. That particular book tells us how that orthography is what we're talking here. Orthography is the manner in which you put something down on paper. Today, we have fairly strict standards for orthography. This is the way you spell something. And there's only one way to spell something. And if you change it, that's wrong. In the days of the King James, they did not have those same standards. In fact, I would say their values even went a little beyond that their values were to have some variety in the printed page. And so what you get is a variety of spellings in certain words, and you especially know this when you go into the original King James 1611. The updated versions we've got now have kind of tweaked itself to our modern orthography. But say Timothy or Timotheus, it was an acceptable, and I would even say a preferred practice in 1611 to have some variety in the way that it is put on the page. And why was that their value in doing so? I can't tell you. I can just tell you it was their value. And anything you go to in that era of the King James, whether it's the King James Bible itself of a 1611 version or another, it is going to have this great variety in the way names are printed or done, and even in the spelling of other words. Mark Twain, I think it was, Samuel Clemens, said something to the effect of, the man who only knows one way to spell a word has a very narrow mind. Maybe he was old enough to remember the days in which spelling had some leeway within it. And that used to be a value in our society. And I think our society in 1611 was much more oral than it is today. And so, today, almost always, we are looking at it and we're reading it, and by sight we see it. 1611 books they just weren't on every shelf. And so there, again, that orthography had not developed, if that's the word. That makes it a positive thing, to the point that it is today. So I'm just going to put it up to orthography. Orthographic values of 1611 are different from today. Now, the challenge you get into then is you get some of these people who come along who want to update. Obviously, the King James Version has been updated since 1611. You couldn't hardly read the 1611 version because of its English, unless you're in southeast. If you're in the southeast, maybe you can, or Buckinghamshire. But most of us couldn't read it. So, should we update this? I say no. And the reason I say no is twofold. One is, it is a bit of a slippery slope. If you go into Jeremiah 31:15 and you say, we're talking about Rachel, it's Rachel all the other times, let's make it Rachel, we pronounce it Rachel, Rachel it is. Then you end up with another verse, and another verse, and another verse, and then you end up with a particular word. King James is the only one that I know that uses the word dispensation. Maybe you come in the people just don't use the word dispensation today. Let's change that to stewardship or administration or something like the other versions have done. And I think that it becomes such a slippery slope that we don't need it. The second reason is to say, I think there is value in making us slow down and think about something as we read. You know, the steps going to the temple, if you go to the remains of the southern steps today, and you've seen steps like this before, but at the temple, they were a long step, a short step, a long step, a short step, a long step, a short step. Now, that was on purpose. And the reason is you couldn't ever get your stride and just run up into the temple. It was done that way in order that you had to go slowly into the temple. You had to think about what you were doing. And that's what they wanted you to do when you were going into the temple. It wasn't, going into the ballpark to play baseball. It is, think about where you're going and what you're doing here. And I think that even though this is, totally orthography, I think nonetheless there is benefit in me and you and our children saying, Rahel, who's that? Well, then all of a sudden we go back and we look and we say, well, Ramah, lamentation, bitter weeping, Rachel weeping for her children, Rahel, that's who it is. And we begin to learn a little bit about orthography and the English language, and we go back and we do a little work and we begin to say, oh, Rachel, sister of Leah, 7 years, bag over her head, the pretty wife, we put all that stuff together. And that's a valuable thing. If we could teach our churches, we would have to do this in a church because our society does not hold this value. If we could teach our churches that a difficult to read Bible is a good thing, if that was a value within the church, then that would be a blessing. I can tell you, I still remember to this day, when I was 18 years old and I went off to college. I went to Hardin-Simmons University in Abilene, Texas, which is a liberal Baptist college. I didn't know it was a liberal Baptist college because I didn't know there was liberal Baptists because I was 18 years old. And I went off to it and I had the New Testament class and I had Dr. McGraw there. And my sister had given me a King James Bible for high school graduation. I still have it today. It's a very good quality one, cowhide and all that kind of stuff. Probably lasted a little longer because of what Dr. McGraw said. But I was sitting there. He called on people to read, whatever passage it was we were reading. And he called on people to read, and he called on me. And I took the little King James Bible, and I began to read it. And I didn't grow up on King James, really. And I began to read it, and I began to stumble over it as you do in King James. And Dr. McGraw stopped me, and he said to the class, you guys get rid of those King James Bibles. You can't even read them. There's no use for a King James Bible today. And he chastised me for having that. And I went 25 years with NASB-stained fingers. What if Dr. McGraw had said, hey, the kid in the back with the full head of hair from New Mexico, he's struggling reading the King James Bible. I want all of you to start using the King James. In fact, just get a King James, we'll read it in here. Because that would be good for your English classes too. It would be good for your literature classes. It's going to help you all across the board. It's going to help you to be a better public speaker because you're going to look and you're going to stumble over some words. And you're going to figure out how to put it together. You're going to be able to catch a cadence within some of these words. And though that kid back there is struggling with it, all of you probably would be. And I think it would be a good thing if all of you in this class would come and we would start. That would put us all on the same page anyway, and we would all be reading the same verses and be able to follow along. And you all, I promise, if you do this, you're going to get better grades in English. So thank me later. What if Dr. McGraw had done that? Well, I probably would have been a better reader, honestly. I don't know if I would have switched and become King James then. He didn't even have to give King James argument. He just has to give a literature argument. There's a great literature argument to be said in having some of these things that you bump up with and you slow down. Brian, I realize I have a lot of commentary on that, but this is Ask the Theologian, and I have a lot of commentary. And so there is the word on what I think is why it says Rahel. I think it's orthography. Appreciate your question there. And thank you very much. Let's go. Speaking of the Southeast,